Good evening, everybody. We're on lesson 15. And tonight we're going to learn about King James. I had originally, I was going to teach about the 1 Corinthians, about love. I was praying and God said, teach everybody about love. And every time I started to write something to teach us all about love, I ended up going and getting sidetracked and wondering about other things. Like last week we learned all about who the Corinthian people were. We learned where Corinth was, what Paul was doing there, why he chose that town to preach in. And then I said, okay, I'm finally ready to dive into that 1 Corinthians passage about love. And I started looking up on different versions of the Bible, the English Standard, the NIV, King James Version, the New King James Version. And I noticed that the King James Version, he doesn't call it love, he calls it charity. So I wondered why charity instead of love, which we'll do next week. And then I started wondering who was King James. So I ask all of you, do you know who King James is? I know he's the king from England, but past that, I had no idea who King James was. And why, out of all of the Bibles, his is the authorized version. Because there are actually many versions of the Bible, and there were versions of the Bible before King James. But most of those versions, they stayed within the church and they didn't get out to the people. So the people didn't have a Bible in their hand to use, look at, read, learn from. The 1611 was 412 years ago, exactly as King James. He was born in 1566. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the old, or not old, historical movies, documentaries. His mother was Mary, Queen of Scots. A little history lesson. She was the cousin to Queen Elizabeth, not our Queen Elizabeth, but there was a prior Queen Elizabeth. And so she had started a coup and an assassination attempt. Elizabeth found out about it, put Mary into the prison, and she sat there for 9 years until they beheaded her. If you ever get to see the movie, Mary Queen. So he came from royalty. He was 13 months old when Queen Elizabeth died. And he was 13 months old and he ascended to the throne. And because that was, and still is, how they do it. It's a inheritance. He died in 1625. He had kidney stones, arthritis, gout. His body wasn't doing very well. He was born Catholic. He was raised Protestant. And he was crossed 13 months. This is what King James is like. He just looks like a normal, everyday fellow. Back in his time, he had his little poofy collar on. He just is a normal guy. Highly intelligent. He wrote many books. He hated tobacco. He actually said, to the nose. He wrote in his book. book, his kingdom. He wanted to share God and the good news in the Bible. He was schooled, but he was learning Latin. He learned Greek. He would have his Greek lessons before breakfast. He would have his Latin lessons in the afternoon. History, composition, arithmetic, ecology, learning about the star systems, dialectic, theology. He was highly, highly intelligent. Our king, our King James. By the age of 8, he spoke Italian. He would go into the summit meetings and speak with anybody fluently because he knew these languages. He laughed one time and said, I knew Latin before I could speak my own native Scots. He came from Scotland. He united phrase Great Britain. King James did that. He grew up to be a very, very powerful king. And he had peace within his own home, his own territories, and he had peace with the surrounding areas. He wrote many books. His books were very powerful books. Some people called him great. He was like Solomon, very, very wise. Solomon's castle, very, very wealthy. In 1604, he started to wonder why the church is as it is. Why are there no Bibles for the people, the normal people? They had just come out of the Dark Ages. They were just starting to become enlightened. And nobody had a Bible in their hand. And he didn't understand why. So he sought out a committee. There was 54 men on the committee. And the committee was actually the head. It was headed up by a Puritan religions that encompassed what he did. Because a different story. But Dr. John Reynolds was a Puritan, and he's the one that held was Arch. He was the head of the committee that King James had started. It had 54 men on it. The translators were organized into 6 groups, and they met in places where they were equally intellectual. They had qualities that were outstanding. 54 men. King James did not choose, or I should say King James chose wisely. Because all 54 of these men spent most of their life pursuing. As I studied the Bible, I found a way have dissected the Bible and learned it word for word to see exactly what God is trying to tell us. and teach us through his word. Interpretations, different type of interpretations. One of the traders was a Dr. Languages for he mud when we were 6. And he had mastered 15 languages. These people were highly intelligent. And the others on the committee were just as qualified. They wrote language dictionaries and lexions. They would debate in Greek. They had conversations in Latin. The earlier versions of the Bible were written in Greek, Latin, and they were here and they were there, and versions of the Bible. Some were only Old Testament, some were New Testament, some were certain. There was no concise Bible like what we have now. These 54 men, they knew Hebrew, they knew Aramaic, they knew the Greek biblical languages. They knew Aramaic, Persian, Latin, Spanish, highly intelligent people. And you can't, or you're translating like a thought or a concept between languages. And these men were Christian. Some of them prayed up to 5 hours a day. They were scholars, they were teachers. It became 7 years from the day they started until they ended. And then there was also quite a few years afterwards that they were revising it, a typo or a misspelled were there, that they were fixing it and making it the Bible 12 years ago. Finally, in 1769, which was well after King James, their editing of the Bible, and people, purpose of him doing an authorized version was so that everybody could have it. It could go into households, it could be read, it could be held. It didn't have to, people didn't have to go into the churches and the synagogues and the temples in order to hear God's word. And that is, in King James authorized it. He says this is the authorized version of the Holy Bible. So again, this is our man, King James. And we know now why we have King James Version. And from his authorized version, we now have other versions, easy to read ones, version, the NIV, the New International Version. But the King James Version is the standard that we all have. Came from what he did. He had a wife. He married probably when he was in his 20s, a princess from Denmark. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's not in the history books, but there are whispers that he did like the boys too. So you can see God picks people, he commissions them to do what he wants them to do. And none of us are perfect. None of us are sinless. Look at Moses. Moses was rock instead of speaking to it and irritated God for not listening. Look at what David did. He went off, sneaking off with Bathsheba. Solomon. None of them perfect. None. So when you think to yourself, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, I've just sinned and God isn't going to need me, want me, or use me, think again. Because God could use all these other people doing their little dastardly deeds when He's not looking. He'll use you too. And He give you, and He continues to love you. So remember that. Now that we know who King James is, and we know who the Corinthians are, why Paul chose Corinth in order to do his ministry over there. Next week we'll get into what long a good week. I thank you for taking the time to listen to our little speech about King James. And stay blessed. And don't forget, we have our time here because of Juanita Folsom Ministry, PO Box 44, Lake Placid, Florida, 33862.